It's the things that couples don't communicate about that breeds that resentment and that causes the problems and then eventually leads to the breakdown of the relationship. Welcome to this next episode of Awake at the Wheel. Today we're going to be discussing marriage and relationships. And we're going to discuss marriage and relationships not only in the context of heterosexual relationships, but many of the concepts that we touch on today apply across the board. So first, I think that it would be great for Oren and I to share a little bit with our listeners about the relationships that we're in with our partners. And not to say that we've figured it out, but I've been with my husband for 20 years. Oren, I believe it's been 30 years for you and your wife. So I think we're doing a thing or two right. So my husband and I have been together for 20 years, actually this month. For those of you who are watching on YouTube and wondering what's happening behind me here, we're celebrating our 20 years in Jamaica. So that's what's going on here. So we met in high school. We were quite different people back then, but one of the keys to our success in a relationship is that we grew together. Because unfortunately, many relationships that start that early on tend to involve individuals who grow apart. So, Oren, tell our listeners a little bit about your history, your relationship.
Okay, well, so my wife and I, our 30th anniversary is coming up in June. We've been together for, I think, about 32 years altogether. Very, very different people. We are as far apart on every metric as you can imagine. But the one thing that we do have in common is that we have some shared values. And that's the most important. Hard work, raising family, basically dedicating ourselves to making sure that we raise our three daughters to be good citizens, to be good, strong, self-loving, compassionate, ambitious people with self-agency. So we share those values, and that's what really unifies us in many ways. We have a shared goal for the future of us, of our family, of our children, of society. So.
Yeah, so that brings up a really great point as well, because even though we both have had longevity in our marriages, I think the structure of our marriages is very different. And Oren, I'll let you elaborate a bit more, but I know that the two of you tend to follow more traditional gender roles. I know that your wife is a domestic engineer and you work outside of the home, whereas with my husband and I, we both work full time. We run two businesses together and we have a kid. So interestingly, I'd say the foundation of the relationships are the same with the shared values, shared goals, but the structure is quite different.
It really is. And interestingly, when we had our first child, we were planning on my wife to go back to work part-time at a certain period of time, and they refused to let her go back. And I was a student at the time. When she met me, I went back to school to finish my undergrad, and we had a whole life plan set up, and but things changed, and right before I got married, and so I decided to go back to school, worked full time, went to school full time. That's when I first learned that you don't need to sleep. Sleep's overrated. And
Yeah.
and again, when we when we had our first child about 4 years into the marriage, again the plan was for her to go back to work. And when they said no, we just said, you know what? We just literally just in the moment said, fine, don't work, don't work outside the home, stay in the home, raise our daughter, and I will work my ass off to make sure that I can support the
Hmm.
family on a single income. And that's what we've done ever since.
Yeah. And another interesting thing is that the example that I had growing up is quite different than the marriage I have right now. And what I mean by that is my parents both immigrated from India and very traditional gender role. My parents owned a business, but my dad did the majority of the work outside the home, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the domestic responsibilities and caring for my brother and I. And not to denounce that by any means, although that was the example that I received, that wasn't what I necessarily wanted for my life, my family, and so on. But that being said, I do think that a huge part of the success of my relationship is the mix of, maybe the Western ideals of romantic love, as well as, the Eastern influence that I had as far as a marriage is certainly about love, but a different type of love, and it's about the pragmatic aspect of it, the practical aspect of it, and all of those wonderful things that I don't think a lot of people think about here in the Western world.
Right. And I talked about this in another podcast, but I'm going to share what I see. And I never went into my marriage or my relationship thinking this, but it's something that I felt. And when I heard this line many years ago, it resonated so powerfully with me. So I've shared it with everyone else, which is now, if anyone's heard this if depending on when the order you hear this podcast, if you've already heard this question before, I apologize, but I'm going to ask Somali if you want to give your favorite simple definition of love, and then I'll give you mine.
My favorite simple definition of love is two individuals who support each other, take care of one another, respect one another, and I would say have shared values.
Okay, and that's not that simple. That's actually you've added several layers of nuance and
Simple for me.
so simple here, okay. So mine is much, much simpler, and by the way, I think your definition, because it kind of encompasses mine as well, is superior. But if someone said just one, like, really simple, short definition, I like mine the best, and we'll elaborate on it a bit more, which is the feeling that your partner has your back no matter what. And that's so unromantic, but it is pragmatic,
Hmm.
and it can apply to any type of love. It can be a best friend. Just, it can't be, I hope it wouldn't be your child because they're not going to have your back. But when it comes to adult love, that feeling. And I always ask people, and if anyone's watching, you can try this as well. Ask people, first of all, they're not going to get that definition. But if you give them that definition, say, if you feel, again, it doesn't have to be real, if you feel that your partner has your back no matter what, it gives you a sense of something. What is that sense? And almost everyone will say it's a sense of, do you know, Mallory? What
Security.
will they say? Oh, no, they'll say it's a sense of safety, right? And the correct answer is a sense of security, which is a bit broader. It's not just semantics. To me, security is a broader sense, and it's a sense of security. And if that doesn't resonate with people enough, I say, what is the opposite of security? So this is funny when people think of the answer. So what's the opposite of security, Melanie?
The opposite of security is feeling unsafe.
Okay. It's funny because if you think about it, literally the opposite is insecurity. So most people, it's funny because, right, grammatically, it's just insecurity with the prefix in.
Sure.
But most people will not think that. They'll think of these other constructs and concepts, right? But if you think about insecurity, and then I just say to people, imagine that you are in a relationship and you feel insecure in that relationship. There's
Hmm.
no way you could ever pretend that that's healthy or beneficial in any way to feel insecure in a relationship. So that's why, if the security part doesn't resonate, think about the opposite of that. If you don't have that sense of security,
Yeah.
what do you have?
Yeah.
So,
So, as far as marriages, it seems to be the consistent statistic over the last few decades that 50% of marriages end in divorce. Is that still the accurate number, Oren?
it depends. I've heard slightly now lower. I've heard it down to 40%, but let's say, between 40 and
Hmm.
50%. Also depends on the jurisdiction. But those are the numbers that we get, right? Sometimes a little bit lower,
Yeah.
but let's say 40 50, right?
Yeah.
And
So,
especially if you include long, sorry.
come on.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, especially if you include, like, common law marriages, other long-term relationships. Like, if you consider like a long-term established relationships, then 50% is usually pretty close to the mark.
Yeah. And I want to do my best here as we discuss this to not insert my own biases about marriage. Obviously, I'm in favor of marriage, and obviously, I'm in favor of, working things out. But that being said, there's always exceptions to that rule. A large part, in my view, and what I'll say is in my clinical practice, even if I'm not working with couples per se, I would say the vast majority of the clients that I'm seeing, we're speaking about the relationship in one way, shape, or form. And consistently, one of the things that I hear, and I'm really overgeneralizing in some ways here, but generally speaking, one of the biggest issues is that there aren't shared values, there aren't shared goals, there isn't a mutual understanding of one another, and they don't have each other's back. And that being said, the people that I'm seeing are typically in crisis or going through something very difficult. Um, but I think that that's one of the biggest challenges in marriage is not how it goes in the good times, but how's it going in the bad times.
Exactly, and I'm gonna throw if I can go into, instructor mode for a minute, please, and
Of
I do this
course.
in therapy as well, and I agree with you 100%, and the stats support us, that it doesn't matter what people come for in therapy. It can be for, alcoholism, it can be for work, it can be for stress, it can be for schizophrenia. In the end, the vast majority of psychologists will say that the primary focus of the work they do is relationships. Somehow, whether it's a romantic relationship or whether it's other types of relationships, it's relationships. We're social animals. So it's not surprising that that's what so much of what our work
Yeah.
is. So a few things about that. When you talk about the bad times or when things are getting rough, here's something that I tell people, all my patients, all my students, and I think it's so important. I know I focus on this all like more than probably anybody else, and some people they get really let's say uncomfortable with it because they don't even understand what the word is. So I say to people, what is the most important word in or most important emotion or sentiment in a relationship? No one ever gets it right because they talk about love, so respect, support, whatever. And I go, those are all great, but the word I'm thinking of, I call it the cancer of relationships, or relationship cancer. It's so toxic, it's insidious, and it's there for so long before you even know that it's there, and sometimes it's already eaten away at the relationship or at your well-being. Any idea what that sentiment is? I know we've talked about this many times, so
I was gonna say I know what it is because we've talked about it before and we've talked about it in the context of clients that we work with. So it's resentment.
yeah, it's resentment. And here's the thing, so as soon as if I say to somebody, "It sounds like you resent your husband," the reflex that a lot of people will say is, "No, no, I love my husband," or whoever.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I say resentment has nothing to do with love. Now, if you resent someone, you might not love them as much, but these are two separate constructs. When one goes up or down, the other one might go up and down as well, but they're separate constructs. They're related but
Right.
separate. So what I tell people is, so I go to these couple of stages. And so I say, number one, I say resentment is, if we think about it, if you look at the definition, the most basic understanding is, I feel that you have wronged me in some way and I'm upset. That's really what it boils down to. Then it's a degree, like, how bad is that resentment? But that's all it is. When people can understand that that's all that it means. Somehow I'm harboring some hurt or upset, something that I feel you did to me, that you wronged me somehow. When I break it down that way, people are much more willing to accept. That's number one. But then there's several other points. The second thing I say is resentment is often unconscious. Okay. And if it's unconscious, you're not even aware of it. That's that means it's operating there. It's somewhere in the background. All right. And then there's the third part that especially when it's in the background, you're not even aware of it. But here's the most important part. And I say to people, I say, if you were a cave person and you felt somebody wronged you, what does your cave person DNA tell you to do? Melanie?
Attack.
Right. Okay. Now here's something I tell people, that they ask your friends this. If you say to them the same thing I just said, that if you're a cave person and someone wronged you, what would your cave person DNA tell you to do? It's funny because see if you can predict what the other people are going to say. Some people say, I just say get back at them, get
Yeah.
revenge, retaliate. Some say attack, some say
Yeah.
kill, some say smash, right? Some say cry, some say
Mm.
run away. So see if you can predict what the other person's going to say. But the part about retaliate, get back at them, attack, if you're not even aware that that's your operating system in the background, that something saying I'm resentful, I'm
Yeah.
hurt, whatever, and I need to get back at them, you're going to be getting back at them unconsciously. You're going to be doing it in passive aggressive ways. You're going to be doing it indirectly. You're going to be making quote unquote mistakes or forgetting to do things or saying things not as well. You're saying them not so tactfully. And here's something that blows people's minds, and I've had other sex therapists who've disagreed. So I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not going to say everyone will agree with me.
Hmm.
But in my own clinical practice, I say, and I say this to my students all the time, I say, when I have a heterosexual couple, now when you hear the question, you'll understand why it has to be heterosexual. I say, in a
Okay.
heterosexual long-term relationship, people who are usually in their mid to late 30s or older, 40s, 50s, 60s, I say, in the couple, who's more likely to withhold sex, the male or the female? What do you think everyone says?
I think the generally held belief is females,
Right. Okay. And I say in my own practice, it's usually the male, but they never
interesting,
say, oh, yes, I'm withholding sex to punish. What is the number one reason that these
right?
men in their 30s, 40s, 60s are saying, why are they saying that they're not having sex? Number one reason.
I would say they're blaming their wives.
Nope. That's not the number one reason. Not in my case. Again, in my clinical practice, I have a different answer. Okay. The answer is
What
they
is
say
it?
they're tired. They're tired. They work really hard. A
Okay.
lot of these cases, the wife may be working at home, a domestic engineer. They're working 40, 60, 80 hours a week. If they can support a
Hmm.
family on a single income, they're working like many, many hours. They're exhausted. So, and
Yeah.
their wife knows that too. She knows that he's tired and exhausted, whatever. But of course, she's thinking, but why can't he step up? He knows how much this means to me. He knows I'm feeling unattractive,
Hmm.
unloved, right?
Hmm.
And unprioritized or deprioritized. Why can't he just step up? And I always say, why would somebody push themselves to the brink if they feel I am still upset with you because you wronged me? You owe me. Why would I rise above that and try to do good for you when you haven't done right by me? So I say that
Right.
if you can deal with the resentment, and by the way, when I talk about the resentment being unconscious, the most important part about that is, and this gives people license to be able to acknowledge their resentment. I say many times resentment is irrational, especially when it's unconscious. And if people can accept that it's irrational, and then they can say to their partner, look, I'm telling you right now, you do not deserve this. This is on me. Somehow, something's in my mind where I'm resenting you. Okay. And they explain what resentment means. And they say, I want to do everything in my power not to feel this way. And when they have that honest talk, when they start to focus on the resentment, they're not so tired anymore because guess what? It's fatiguing.
Hmm.
It's exhausting to deny reality, to pretend that you're not resentful towards your partner. When the men or women, whoever it is, when they can acknowledge, oh, yes, you know what? Yeah, I do feel this way. I do remember this from last year or 6 years ago or whatever. When
Right.
they're able to really just put it on the table, now we can deal with it.
Yeah, and I want to broaden that topic of resentment to, I think, the cliche with working with relationships and with couples. And really, I would say what a number of couples therapists tend to focus on, but it's too surface level, communication, right? Everyone says
Right.
communication isn't there, communication is poor, therefore it's causing the breakdown of the relationship. But that's far too broad. Oftentimes, and I would say most of the time, it's the things that couples don't communicate about that breeds that resentment and that causes the problems and then eventually leads to the breakdown of the relationship.
Exactly. And I tell people there's two types. So again, if I can go into lecture mode, I apologize.
Hmm.
But I say there's two types of resentment. One is that something like a catastrophic event, a major event happened. For example, you were cheated on. That type of
Hmm.
betrayal, right? That creation of insecurity, a sense of insecurity, right? How can you feel secure when you know your partner betrayed you that way? That
Right.
resentment is like one massive event. It's a catastrophic event. But for most people, it's a pileup of daily, like little tiny things. They add up, okay. And this resentment, little bit, becomes a mountain of resentment. And I say sometimes, or I say many times to my patients, sometimes that mountain of resentment is so high that even if the partner has started to remedy it, even if they've done a 180 and
Yeah.
they've become the person you want them to become, too late that they can't overcome that mountain. It got too high. So now every time something small happens, it's not something small. It triggers
Hmm.
a memory. It's a cascade of
Yeah.
all these other daily resentments that have added up, and so
Yeah.
you get hit with it all the time, right? All day, you just get
Yeah.
triggered. This little okay.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
I want to
one
shift
part.
gears a bit and focus on
Yep.
what you mentioned there about cheating. Cheating is one of those
Okay.
ones, and it leads to a conversation about deal breakers. That's something that I find a lot with couples as well, is that somebody did a wrong that they predetermined was a deal breaker, and that will then cause or lead to at least the deterioration of that relationship. And I know that you have very interesting and differing opinions on cheating and the whole construct of cheating. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure, and we're going to be revisiting these topics over and over because we're only scratching the surface in a relatively brief podcast. So anyone who's listening, we're just trying to present some topics, make you think about it, step outside of your own belief system, maybe, and then maybe look into it further. And we will definitely return to some of these topics. So,
Hmm.
so with cheating, yeah, first of all, people have to recognize that broadly speaking, there's two types of cheating. There's emotional and sexual infidelity. And they're both just as devastating. Research is pretty clear, depending on which study you look at. The fact is, I've looked at a lot of them, and you can find lots of people, male, female, gay, straight, monogamous, polyamorous, whatever the case. if you well with polyamory, you're not supposed to be cheated on, but there are ways you can be cheated on. But the point is that that the emotional infidelity for many people is worse than the sexual. Sexual, they say, you know what, I
Hmm.
can understand he was drunk or she did this or that, and I'm pissed off. I hate it. It's burnt in my mind, but I understand that it was a bad behavior. It was misconduct.
Yeah.
Whereas with emotional infidelity, it feels more personal. They feel that that you're betraying me as a human being. You've broken my
Hmm.
trust beyond just the sexual, but as a unit that we have. And they take it more personally. With emotional infidelity, there's a greater risk that the person's actually going to leave. If it was just sex one time, they would still maybe be secure and want to stay in the relationship. If, however, it's an emotional affair, then the person who's been cheated on feels that, okay, my partner, by the way, can be emotional and sexual together, of course, but when it's
Sure.
deeper, when it's more emotional, there's a greater risk that my partner is going to actually leave me, right? As opposed to just doing something really ugly and terrible, and that triggers insecurity more than anything else. The fear that my partner's going to leave me.
Yeah, and that's something I want to emphasize and dig into some more is that cheating is rarely about the act itself. It's not about the sex. It's not about the stepping out of the marriage. It is what it represents. So I'm no longer safe in this relationship. I'm no longer valued in this relationship. So I think that that's something we need to elaborate a bit on as well.
All right, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna broaden that to what you just mentioned beyond just the cheating, because some people might say, well, infidelity has not been a problem in the relationship. Well, I
Hmm.
want to bring in my 3+1 factor model of, let's say, relationship disharmony, if I may bring that up, because it applies to cheating
Of course.
especially, but it's
Yeah.
to any situation, which is this. I say to people, I call it 3+1. Um, and the plus one, I'll explain in a second, but it seems qualitatively different than these three. But I've seen it enough times in therapy that I have to include it in my model. So what I say is, if you take these four constructs, 3+1, and you look at what you bring to the table or to the relationship and your partner does, and if not just any one of them, and again, I'll explain what they are in a second, not just any one, but the totality of them. If there's a huge discrepancy between yourself and your partner where you feel I'm putting in far more than my partner is on these four metrics,
Hmm.
nothing fuels insecurity, resentment, feeling off than these what I've found, these fundamental, these four. Now, before I go further, I'm just going to bring up my Plinko analogy. Plinko from The Price is Right. For if people watch Stranger Things in this most recent season, I think it was season four, 11 has this board where there's these pegs, and she takes a disc. And on The Price is Right, it was a disc and there were ledges. And what I mean by Plinko is that if you give me an answer, if I ask you a question, and you give me an answer, I go, that's a good answer, but that's just a ledge or a peg up here. I'm looking for a
Hmm.
bottom slot answer. Here's the deeper, more profound answer underneath everything you're describing. So these are good, these are important, but these are not the real problem. Here's the problem. Just like with
Right.
infidelity, the cheating is not necessarily the problem. It represents, as you said, something beneath that. So I'm going to give you the four answers, and I've considered these four slots. So what anyone else says, they go, what about this? What about that? Probably they are ledges or pegs. They're not, they can regress onto one of these four slots. So the 3+1, the fourth one is respect. Okay. And again, it's never going to be perfect. Two people don't respect each other exactly the same. But if there's a huge discrepancy,
Right.
and remember, it's not just one, it's all four of them. So respect is one. The second one is investment. And this covers most things. How much, and it's not financial investment only, how much you do for your partner or how much you invest in the relationship. Commitment is a big one. How committed are you to the partner, to the relationship? Someone who's cheating, you feel that they're not that committed. All right. Whereas other people, they say, no, no, I'm totally committed to the relationship. My prefrontal cortex, the logical part of me says, I want to be with you forever. But my limbic system, my reward system, my novelty seeking system, that is, I'm still committed to you, but I'm still seeking something else. Okay. Like that's so the commitment can be there, but the person is doing things on the side and trying to explain that to somebody. Most people can't compute that. They go, no, no, if you stepped outside the relationship, how can you say you're committed to me? So anyway, so there's commitment, there's investment, there's respect. And the fourth one, it's actually the flip side of investment. It's sacrifice. If two
Hmm.
people are working and then they get married, let's say, or they have children, and one person has to give up their career, you could argue that you're investing in the family, But if the
Right.
person's focus is on, no, no, I've sacrificed my career, I've sacrificed my identity, I've sacrificed my independence, my financial autonomy, whatever, right? My mental health because I'm dealing with kids all the time rather than adults at work.
Hmm.
These four things, if you feel that that again, so someone might be higher on commitment, but all other three of them you're much higher on, then in totality, if you feel that I'm doing much more for the relationship than the other person, that's going to it's going to throw you off. It's like you're walking with a pebble in your shoe and you're always one step off. Okay, so that's my four-factor model. And
Yeah.
when I give this to my client, if I just say, Mallory, when I give this to my patients and I tell them, you guys use this as a model. You'll have your specific points, your ledges, your pegs.
Hmm.
You can talk about where you feel there's this discrepancy. But if you have it as
Hmm.
a four-factor model, at least you're speaking the same language. And that's really important. When you want to talk about communication, you must make sure that, again, you have a foundation that you both agree on. You go, oh, all of this falls into these 4 points. Now we can work on that and try to change the balance so that it feels more equitable.
Yeah, and to that point of it being equitable, I think that a lot of it is to do with how a couple and how partners frame these things. And what I specifically want to hit on here is sacrifice. Sacrifice isn't necessarily a bad thing if it is done so in a respectful and equitable way in the relationship. Um, I think that's a beautiful thing if people can sacrifice. And I mentioned my husband and I have been together for 20 years, married for 16 years. And in those years, we've gone through all of adult life. I'm giving away my age pretty clearly here, but all of the ups and downs and changes that come along with it. And you better believe that came with a hell of a lot of sacrifice. The biggest example I think of is when I returned to graduate school, I was working full time. We had a 3-year-old kid. He was working full time and I was in school full time. But there's the acknowledgement of this sacrifice as a family is going to lead to our greater good. There wasn't any sort of resentment on either of our behalf. And I think that's the key there, actually, as I'm saying this out loud, is that there was an agreed upon arrangement of this is how it's going to look. This is the goal that we're working towards, and we're choosing to not harbor resentment about it. But sacrifice was certainly a factor.
Exactly. And you sacrificed with the understanding or the hope that there's going to be reciprocity, right? That he
Hmm.
will sacrifice in certain place or he will invest or he'll compensate somehow. And yeah, so that's how sacrifice feels like an investment because there's a return. Both you can see the result. You have a healthy son, that you're both invested in. And once again, that reciprocity. Without that, it's an unhealthy relationship. It's one-sided, and that fuels resentment. So yeah, and
Hmm.
that's the thing. It's amazing when I work with couples where either they are not yet married or they're married for a number of years, and I realize they've never really had a discussion about some of these big ticket
Hmm.
items. Whether it's like where you're going to live or do you want to have children or anything like that, and that's where you said earlier about the communication. Well, this is an example where it's not about like it's just how can you not have these discussions? And when people say, "Well, it's
Yeah,
uncomfortable," or whatever, well, what's even more uncomfortable is
sure.
harboring that unconscious or conscious resentment. That's really uncomfortable too.
Yeah. And the ultimate demise of the relationship. That's a hell of a lot more uncomfortable than having discussions. And as a side note, I would say that's one of the most wonderful things about my relationship is that we talk about everything. Probably to the point where it's annoying to the outside observer. I've actually had a family member lovingly say that she just thinks that we're gross and all we do is talk and we're very clear about how we feel about each other. And I think that's a great thing because there's very little that is left unsaid, especially the uncomfortable stuff.
Right. And again, it's as you're saying, it's far more uncomfortable when your relationship falls apart or somebody steps
Yeah,
outside of the marriage or relationship,
yeah,
or something else like that, or you're harboring that resentment. And that's why again,
right.
with those, even though that Plinko board, those four slots, right? The fact is, all of those regress, like I said, onto resentment. And that's why I always say,
Hmm.
focus on the resentment because if you fix everything else in your relationship and someone's still harboring some resentment, you can't move forward. It's there. Again, it eats
No,
away. It's
yeah,
toxic.
it's going to eat away. Yeah, yeah. And now I want to look at sacrifice from a more negative lens because I believe that the direction that relationships and marriage as an institution is going is not great. I don't see that people, young women specifically, are respecting marriage the way that I believe that it should be respected. And for centuries it has been respected. A huge part of that comes from this idea of, well, I shouldn't have to give up my career. I shouldn't have to take care of a house. I don't need a man to take care of me. These are all messages that young women are receiving through toxic feminism, toxic femininity. We've spoken in a previous episode about the patriarchy, perceived patriarchy, and what role that's playing predominantly in the corporate world and in careers, but it really warrants some discussion as far as what that type of attitude is doing to marriages, to families, and the lack thereof, frankly.
Right. And so, I mean, one thing about toxic femininity or feminism is a narcissism. It's it's I shouldn't have to do this or I deserve that.
Hmm.
And like,
Hmm.
and by the way, if a man said that, or if that man had that mindset, then it would be equally toxic. But
Yes.
the toxic feminists are saying this is in response to the patriarchy, in response to having our needs deprioritized and so on. And I'd say, great, yes, if you're fighting for equality, if you're fighting to be seen as an equal partner, if you're fighting so that those four metrics are in concert with each other, great. But when you're saying that, no, 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 it's my turn, it's our turn now. We deserve this
Yeah.
high status, and the man should be down here, or that it's his turn to
Hmm.
suffer. That's not a healthy perspective because again, that just fuels
No.
resentment, and it's unrealistic. And by the way, I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, this is something I'm seeing with young women. And it's not to crap all over women because believe me, I can crap all over men as well. But with young women, let me just say quickly with young men. For young men, the biggest discrepancy I see is, and if again, I'm not trying to besmirch everybody, but I have seen
Hmm.
so many people where young men today in their 20s, late 20s, even early 30s aren't growing up. Right, far more than any
Yeah.
other generation, I think, that young men are afraid to grow up, and they have a whole list of reasons why they shouldn't, and they rationalize and they frame it this way, and they use Andrew Tate as a terrible model, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, that's young men have a hard time growing up. For young women, what I have seen more than ever before. And I've had so many men come to me. Some of these men are what young people call simps these days. Basically, they are
Yeah.
throwing away their pride and self-esteem to just bow at the knees of some woman who probably doesn't even want them. Okay, so whether they are
Right.
simps, whether they are players, whether they are solid men, whatever the case may be, they've all said the same thing, which is they cannot believe that. And again, I'm not pretending that men are not a-holes themselves. Okay, so let's be clear on
Hmm.
that. Men can be total a-holes,
Sure.
right? But where a woman, whether they're in a relationship or it's a friendship, and the man is thinking that we're heading toward a relationship, and the woman's making it
Yeah.
seem like that, but really she's only playing him. Whatever the case may be, when he tries to call her out for her behavior, not in an aggressive way,
Hmm.
not in an a-hole way, but just tries to make her accountable or shows her, by the way, when you did this, it hurt me, or I felt it was unfair,
Yeah.
or I think that there's an imbalance. As soon as he does that, suddenly she starts gaslighting him. Suddenly she starts saying, somehow she's playing the victim, and he ends up walking out of that
Mm.
conversation like, what just happened? How did I was emotionally hurt, or I was deprived, or I was neglected, and I'm trying to communicate
Right.
these feelings to my partner,
The
and
proper
in the end,
communication that should be in a relationship.
exactly. I'm doing what I've been told to do. I'm expressing my feelings, and either I'm being insulted, I'm being told I'm not being a real man, or I'm being gaslit. And by the end of the discussion, I'm consoling her. No longer are my feelings being considered. Now it's what did I do wrong to her? And again, I want to be very clear here. I've seen many dynamics: male, male, female, male, female, male, female, female. Doesn't matter. It's not about the sex. It's about any dynamic where one person is constantly turning things around so that they are always the victim, and whenever they do something wrong and they're held to account, suddenly you need to console me for daring to tell me what I did wrong to you. Now your needs, your feelings, your well-being is not even on the table anymore. Now it's all about me. That's what I'm saying is very narcissistic.
Yeah. So a lot of thoughts come to mind here as far as, I mean, obviously there's lots of problems with that, and that is, that type of behavior as that begins to perpetuate and continues to be perpetuated is not going to lead to healthy, successful relationships. And I suppose the next thing I'm going to say likely is more so in the context of heterosexual relationships, but I think it can be extrapolated across other different types. But nonetheless, A huge part of the demise of relationships and people entering relationships from the female perspective is, I'll go back to it, these strong women, successful women have been fed this notion that they don't need somebody to take care of them. But I think what we need to define, or at least redefine, is what does it mean to have someone take care of them? And I'm thinking about, in the clinical work that I do, a lot of the women I'm fortunate to work with are high status women, successful in their careers, have their own home, so on and so forth. So saying that they don't need a man usually refers to not needing the financial support of a man, which that is completely fine. But let's look at the other needs that we have as human beings. That's really what a relationship is about, is fulfilling the needs of one another and supporting one another through life, whether that is financial, emotional, sexual, whatever, spiritual, the case may be. There's so many different needs that we need to fill, which can be accomplished in a relationship.
Right, and I've said this so many times. I say this all the time to my wife. I say to anyone who will listen, whatever I've accomplished professionally or in any other area of my life, if I did not have the support of my wife, if I didn't feel she had my back
Mhm.
all the time, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah,
And I tell it to my kids all the time
yeah,
as well that she's the backbone of the family, and I have
right.
no resentment toward her. I have no shame in telling people, yeah, I she supports me in so many ways, just like I support her. We support each other.
Mhm.
We try to meet each other's needs. Are we perfect? No. Okay. I always tell people I'm a parenting expert, I'm a relationship expert, and you tell that to my kids or my wife, they'll laugh in your face, right? Because I talk a good talk. I don't walk the walk all the time. I'm human, and I say this to all my patients and all my students.
Yeah,
I recognize that I'm trying to be better, but that
yeah.
the intention is there, and many times I do what I'm trying to do. If someone says, "Well, I intend to be
Mhm.
better," and they never are, well, that's not a very good bet. But I
Sure.
try my
Yeah.
best, and I really, I've devoted myself trying to be a better person, a better father, better husband. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
there's no shame in being supported by somebody. No one person can do everything. And again, we're social animals. We want to
Right.
be with other people in some capacity. 90 some odd percent of the
Mhm.
people have that need. There's only a small percentage who don't, but everyone else does. And as long as it's done in a
Yeah.
healthy way. And by the way, when you talk about like these financially successful women, the fact is,
Mhm.
sadly, and this is an indictment of men, of women, of society. Sadly, we know the research is clear that when the woman makes more money than the man, that's a huge
Mhm.
predictor of dissatisfaction in relationships. So,
So in terms of if the female makes more, that detracts from satisfaction?
believe it or not, yes. Okay, I should say
Okay.
believe it or not. That's just it's a fact. And
Yeah.
it's not a simple answer for different people. There can be the resentment. There can be that the man feels in like the woman could be. This is something very important. When I tell people all the time. If let's
Mhm.
say a couple is having some argument, fight, whatever, I say it's one of three things. Let's say, for example, either I'll just use the husband. Either the husband was an a-hole to the wife, and everyone would see that, and they would objectively go, "Yeah, wow, you're an a-hole." Or
Yeah.
the husband, what he did was it seemed perfectly reasonable to an
Mhm.
outsider, but because they have a certain history, that what he's saying or doing means something very different to her because
Right.
because of their history, and these words had implications before. And as an outsider, I don't
Mhm.
know that. Or third, he's doing something totally reasonable, perfectly fine, but something about her history, her neuroses, her issues,
Right.
that her baggage, they're being triggered. So I always tell people that when you're in a dynamic with anybody, whether it's a romantic relationship, colleagues,
Mhm.
whatever, you have to wonder, is it objectively they're doing something wrong? Is it that they're doing something wrong that other people can't see, but you can see because of this history? Or are you processing things in a maladaptive way that make you
Mhm.
see and feel and experience things differently from everybody else? And then that's on you, and you need to work on that. So I just kind of shoehorned that in. I'm not sure
Right.
but I wanted to bring that up there because that's an important consideration, to be honest with yourself.
It
Where
is.
is my feeling coming from?
Yeah, and if I can go back a little bit to, again, just the traditional roles, let's call them, of a heterosexual relationship. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but is there not a biological aspect to men wanting to and garnering satisfaction from taking care of a family, taking care of a partner? And again, not doing so in a chauvinistic or disrespectful way, but I think there's a great deal of pride that comes from being able to provide for one's partner or family.
Whenever I work with people, individually or in relationships, I always talk about values. Values are so important, and I ask them. And so for men, you're right. For many men, at least historically, being the provider, being the protector, that gave us that was a value, and that gave a sense of well-being, satisfaction, of
Hmm.
fulfillment. Right. The most important thing in life is a sense of fulfillment, and if someone does all these effort or makes all these efforts and they're not appreciated, that's going to foster resentment. If how or if they feel that that they just if it's in themselves and they don't feel that they can measure up, if they're insecure, if they feel that they can't be that provider and so on, um, they should have resentment toward themselves. But many times they will project it onto their partner, and the partner may have said nothing at all. The partner may be perfect. She may never denigrate him. Maybe they make equal money. Maybe she makes a bit more, and she's never said anything to try to put him down or make him feel like less of a
Hmm.
man, but his own internal neuroses make him feel, that somehow she's poking or she's trying to subtly make him feel less
Hmm.
than, right? Again, it's all about recognizing yourself, being able to have that discussion, because if you have that discussion with your partner and she or he completely denies it, but you can see that no, your denials don't really ring true, or they completely deny it and it's like you realize, oh my gosh, I'm really reading things
Yeah.
wrong, right? Then there needs to be a change one way or the other, but you don't know that, or you can't decide what needs to be fixed if you don't have that discussion, and if you're not honest before
Right.
you're honest with your partner, be honest with yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. Have that level of self-awareness. And we could go on about relationships for hours and hours. I mean, personally, professionally, as a species, I find relationships to be so incredibly valuable and important. But for the sake of time, let's talk now. What do we do with all of this? What are the steps that people can take, or what's even one thing that people can do to move towards having healthier, happier relationships?
All right. Well, first of all, as you say, we can talk about this forever. And so we didn't really touch about different forms of relationships, whether same sex or polyamorous.
Yeah.
So in a future episode, we definitely will talk about that. So for now,
Yeah.
and what I'm about to say applies to those as well. So a few things, as I said a few minutes ago, know yourself, be completely honest with yourself. If you are selfish, if you are needy, if you are whatever, recognize that and either find a partner who's okay with that and who's compatible with that, which is probably not that healthy, or work on improving yourself in the areas where you're lacking so that you can enter into a relationship from a position of strength. And I don't mean strength and dominance. I mean strength as in strength of character. Okay. So that
Hmm.
you can be on equal footing with a partner. And because if you have the self-confidence and you have a healthy self-esteem, you don't have to try to dominate. You don't have to try to control or put someone down. You can come there as two equal, respectful parties. So that's one thing. And the second thing, as I said earlier, really sit down and look at what are my values. And values simply are, how do I want to live my life? What kind of a person do I want to be? What am I, aspiring to? Know them well and find somebody that is compatible with that, that maybe shares same values,
Hmm.
or if these are your values and they have other values and you can put them together, they complement each other, and you are, you're a greater unit than an individual. But don't. Oh, and the final thing is, when you see the person that you think you're in love with or want to be with, recognize that at the very beginning, what you see is not real. What you see is a projection of your own needs, of your own longings, of your own wants, of your own insecurities, thinking that they're going to take care of or they're going to compensate for these insecurities and so on. Recognize that you're seeing an illusion, and everyone else who's not in love with this person, they can see reality far better than you can. Plus, your brain chemistry, we'll talk
Hmm.
about this in another podcast. Your brain chemistry, science has shown, is all messed up at the beginning. Okay. You're quote unquote
Yeah.
crazy in love. So your neurochemistry changes. Recognize all of that and try to see the person for who he or she really is, not for who you want them to be or need them to be. And you'll have a better sense of whether this person is the kind of person with whom you can establish and maintain a long term relationship, or at least try to.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. So I'll attempt to be succinct here. With the couples that come in, excuse me, that come into our office, I would say that the majority of them, the advice or the recommendation that I provide is each of you need to work on yourselves before we can really get into some, meaningful couples work. And simply put, two healthy individuals make a healthy couple. So even in the context of brand new relationships, before it gets to the point where you need to see a therapist and you need to work on things, look at what are you bringing to the relationship? What is it what qualities do I have that are going to be able to serve, and not in a subservient way, but what can I do to serve my partner in the best way possible? How do I become the best partner possible for whoever my future mate is?
Excellent. And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.
As much as we love listening to ourselves speak, especially me, we would love to hear from you as well. So our emails are in the description below. If you would please write to us with your questions, feedback, comments, topics that you would like us to cover. We can do this together, the two of us, but it's much better if we do it together. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we are going to have a segment called Rounds Table, where we're going to discuss the feedback and the questions and so on from our audience, and we will take it to the next level. We're going to help you be able to deal with some of these issues that you might be bringing us, or it's going to be a topic for us to explore together. And we really look forward to building a community of like-minded people who want to do right by others, not just for themselves.